Millionaire CEO was going on honeymoon with his fiancée until he saw his ex at the airport with a baby. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter's Stories, your own family story channel. May the Almighty bless every woman with strength that moves mountains, a heart that heals the broken, and wisdom that inspires generations. May she always walk with dignity, her courage be unshakable, and her spirit shine brighter than the stars. May the women in our lives, the sisters, wives, daughters, and grandmothers, always be honored, cherished, and celebrated, for they are the backbone of love, the silent warriors who build families and hold the world together. May every hardship be lifted from their shoulders, every tear replaced with joy, and every step guided by divine light. May their homes overflow with peace, their hearts overflow with love, and their paths be guarded with blessings that never end. May their voices always be heard, their dreams realized, and their contributions acknowledged, for the world owes its beauty and strength to them. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." Chris Hanks had never believed in moments that could split a life in half. Not until the phone buzzed in his pocket while Kate Ruth laughed beside him, champagne flute raised in celebration of their upcoming honeymoon. "To Bali," Kate said, her voice bright with anticipation. "To us." Chris forced a smile and touched his glass to hers, but his mind was already elsewhere. The phone buzzed again, then again. His assistant never interrupted him unless something demanded immediate attention. "Give me just a second," Chris said, stepping away from the first-class lounge's bar. The message was simple. "Thought you should see this before your flight. Congratulations would have been appropriate. Jennifer." The attached photo loaded slowly, each pixel materializing like a punch to the gut. It was from last night's company awards ceremony, the one Chris had skipped to finalize wedding details with Kate's mother, the annual Strategic Consultant of the Year award ceremony that he'd attended every year for the past decade. Until this one. The photo showed the stage, the podium, the corporate backdrop with his company's logo repeated endlessly. And there, accepting the crystal trophy, stood Zoe Gabby, his ex-wife. She wore emerald silk that made her dark skin luminous. Her hair was different, shorter, more sophisticated. She looked powerful, confident, nothing like the woman who'd signed divorce papers with trembling hands. But that wasn't what stopped Chris's heart. In her arms, secured against her chest in some kind of carrier wrap, was a baby. The photographer had caught the moment perfectly. Zoe looking down at the child with such fierce love that it radiated from the image. The baby's face was partially visible, turned toward her chest, but Chris could see enough. Dark curls. The exact same curls his mother had in her baby photos, the ones she'd shown him every birthday. High cheekbones, the shape of the ears, the way the small fingers curled against Zoe's collarbone. Chris's knees went weak. He gripped the edge of a nearby table to steady himself. "Chris." Kate's voice cut through the roaring in his ears. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." He turned the phone off and shoved it into his pocket, but his hands shook violently. Kate noticed everything. She always did. "Nothing," he managed. "Just work." "On our honeymoon?" Kate's smile dimmed. "You promised. No work for 2 weeks." Chris nodded, unable to form words. His mind was calculating, counting backwards, trying to remember when Zoe had filed for divorce, trying to remember the last time they'd been together, trying to remember if she'd looked different, if there had been signs, if he'd missed something catastrophic. The answer crashed over him like ice water. He had missed something. He'd missed everything. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're now beginning boarding for first-class passengers on Flight 873 to Bali." Kate grabbed her carry-on, excitement flooding back into her expression. "That's us! Come on, this is going to be amazing!" Chris followed her toward the gate, his body on autopilot while his mind spun in sickening circles. The photo had been from last night. Zoe had been at his company, accepting an award, with a baby who looked like his family. Why hadn't anyone told him she'd be there? Why hadn't Jennifer warned him? Why had his ex-wife been consulting for his company and he'd known nothing about it? They reached the gate. Kate handed over her boarding pass, already chattering about the resort, the beaches, the spa treatments she'd booked. Chris looked up, and there she was. Zoe Gabby, standing near the windows overlooking the tarmac, the baby still secured against her chest. She was on her phone, talking to someone in low tones, her free hand resting protectively on the baby's back. The afternoon sunlight caught in her hair made her glow like she was lit from within. The world narrowed to a single point. She turned as if sensing his stare, and their eyes met across the crowded terminal. Chris waited for shock, for anger, for the pain he'd seen in her face the last time they'd spoken, when she'd told him she couldn't do it anymore, couldn't be married to someone who treated her like a ghost in her own home. Instead, Zoe smiled. It was a small smile, knowing and sad and somehow victorious, like she'd been waiting for this exact moment, like she'd planned it. She adjusted the baby's blanket with practiced ease, her movements gentle and sure, and turned back to the window, dismissing him, erasing him from her world as easily as she'd step over a crack in the sidewalk. "Sir?" The gate agent was waiting for his boarding pass. "Chris, come on." Kate pulled at his arm, her voice developing an edge. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The baby shifted in Zoe's arms, tiny fists emerging from the blanket to wave aimlessly at nothing. Zoe kissed those small fingers, murmuring something Chris couldn't hear, her whole face softening with tenderness. "Chris!" Kate's voice had real irritation now. He handed over his boarding pass, his eyes still locked on Zoe. She was boarding too. Different flight. The sign above her gate read Paris. Of course she was going somewhere beautiful. Of course she was living a life he knew nothing about. Of course she'd moved on so completely that seeing him didn't even register as significant. Kate was already down the jetway. Chris forced himself to follow, but he looked back one more time. Zoe had the baby out of the carrier now, holding the child up to see out the window at the plains. The baby's hands pressed against the glass, leaving small prints. Zoe laughed at something, her whole face transforming with joy that seemed to come from somewhere deep and unbreakable. She'd never laughed like that during their marriage. Not once. Not even on their wedding day. Chris stumbled onto the plane, found his seat, buckled himself in like a man preparing for a crash. Kate settled beside him, already pulling out her tablet to review their itinerary. "You're being weird," she said without looking up. "What's going on?" Chris opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I saw my ex-wife." Kate's fingers froze on the screen. She turned to him slowly, her expression carefully neutral, in a way that meant she was anything but neutral. "Where?" "At the gate. She's flying to Paris." Kate's jaw tightened. "And?" "She had a baby." The words hung between them like smoke from a fire, neither of them could extinguish. Kate's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, realization, anger, and finally something that looked like pity. "How old?" "I don't know. Small. Maybe a few months old, maybe more. I don't know what babies look like at different ages." Kate put down her tablet with deliberate care. Her voice was very quiet when she spoke. "When did you two get divorced?" Chris's mind went blank. He knew this. He knew the date. He'd signed the papers, had them filed, received the final decree. But his brain refused to calculate, refused to count the months, refused to confirm what his body already knew. "About a year and a half ago," he whispered. Kate turned to look out the window. Chris could see her reflection in the glass, could see the moment she did the math he couldn't bring himself to complete. "Chris," she said, still not looking at him. "Is that your child?" The flight attendant appeared, smiling professionally, asking if they wanted champagne before takeoff. Kate waved her away without speaking. Chris couldn't even acknowledge her presence. "I don't know," he said. "I don't know. But it could be. I don't know." Kate finally looked at him, and the expression on her face made Chris want to disappear into the airplane seat. "You don't know if you have a child," she said. Each word was precisely enunciated, like she was explaining something simple to someone very stupid. "You saw your ex-wife with a baby, and you don't know if that baby is yours. We've been divorced for... That doesn't mean anything." Kate's voice rose, then dropped when other passengers turned to look. "That doesn't mean anything, Chris. When was the last time you two were together?" Chris closed his eyes. He could see it, the last night before Zoe moved out. She'd tried to talk to him. She'd made dinner, his favorite, and he'd been late. So late the food had gone cold. She'd waited anyway. When he'd finally arrived, she'd looked at him with such desperate hope that it had made him uncomfortable. They'd argued. He couldn't even remember about what now. Something about his schedule. Something about his mother. Something about him never being present, even when he was home. Then she'd kissed him, desperate and sad and final. He'd kissed her back, tasting salt from her tears. "Chris?" Kate's voice was sharp. "The night before she moved out," he admitted. Kate made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Of course it was." The plane began to taxi. Chris stared at the seat in front of him, his mind replaying the image of Zoe at the window with the baby. The way she'd held that child, the joy in her face, the completeness, the absolute certainty that she didn't need him for anything. She'd moved on. She'd built a whole new life, a life that might include his child, a child he'd known nothing about. "I need to get off this plane," Chris said suddenly. "We're already moving." Kate, I need to get off." "We're going to Bali, Chris. We're going on our honeymoon. You're going to calm down, and we're going to figure this out when we get back." But Chris knew with devastating certainty that there was no coming back from this. No Bali beach could erase what he'd seen. No honeymoon could undo the question Kate had asked. "Is that your child?" The plane lifted into the sky, carrying Chris away from answers and toward a paradise that already felt like hell. He watched through the window as the ground fell away, and somewhere below, in a different plane climbing toward different clouds, was the life he should have fought for. In that other plane, Zoe Gabby held her son against her chest and whispered into his dark curls, "That's your daddy, baby. That's the man who chose everything else over us." Brad made a small sound, his tiny hand gripping her finger with surprising strength. "But we don't need him anymore," Zoe continued, her voice steady and strong despite the tears she refused to let fall. "We never did. You and me, baby. We're enough. We've always been enough." Chapter 2. Paradise Lost. Bali was supposed to be heaven. White sand beaches stretched endlessly beneath impossibly blue skies. Crystal water lapped at shores where palm trees swayed in perfect tropical breezes. Their villa perched on a cliff, offering views that belonged in travel magazines. Every luxury Chris had paid for, every detail Kate had planned, surrounded them in borrowed perfection. Chris stood on their private balcony overlooking the ocean while Kate slept, and all he could see was Zoe's face at the airport, that knowing smile, the baby in her arms, the complete absence of need for him in her expression. His phone remained off. He'd turned it off on the plane and hadn't found the courage to turn it back on. What would he find? Messages from Jennifer explaining why she'd sent that photo. Emails from colleagues who knew Zoe had been at the awards ceremony. Evidence of a life happening in parallel to his own, a life he'd been completely blind to. "You've been out here for hours." Chris turned to find Kate in the doorway, wrapped in a hotel robe, her hair disheveled from sleep. She looked beautiful and miserable in equal measure, and the contrast made Chris's chest ache. "Couldn't sleep," he said. Neither could I. She moved to stand beside him, but maintained careful distance, like he was radioactive. We need to talk about this, Chris. I know. Do you? Kate's voice had an edge he'd never heard before. Because from where I'm standing, you brought your ex-wife and her, maybe baby, on our honeymoon. We're in one of the most romantic places on earth, and you can't even look at me without seeing her. Kate. No. She held up a hand. I've been patient. I've been understanding. I've given you space to process. But I'm standing here in Bali, supposedly on the most romantic trip of our lives, and you're spiraling over a woman you divorced. Over a child you didn't even know existed until yesterday. Chris wanted to argue, to defend himself, but every word died in his throat. She was right. Completely, devastatingly right. Tell me about her, Kate said. Tell me about Zoe. The name sounded foreign in Kate's mouth, like a word from a language she'd never meant to learn. Chris had never talked about his marriage, had kept that part of his life sealed away like something shameful. We were married for almost 3 years, he began, the words coming slowly. Met at a company function. She was working as a freelance consultant, smart. Brilliant, actually. She could walk into a room and within an hour understand the entire power structure, the relationships, the unspoken dynamics. People would spend months trying to figure out what she saw in minutes. Kate waited, her expression unreadable. My mother hated her from the start, Chris continued, said she wasn't sophisticated enough, wasn't from the right background, didn't understand our world. Zoe came from a working-class family, put herself through school, built her career from nothing. Mom said that made her hungry in the wrong ways, said people like Zoe always wanted something. But I told myself it didn't matter, that I loved Zoe, and that's what counted. Chris gripped the balcony rail, the wood rough under his palms. I told myself I was different from my parents, that I valued substance over status, but I never defended her. Not really. Mom would make these cutting little comments at family dinners, and I'd just sit there. Zoe would try to talk to me about it later, and I'd tell her she was being too sensitive, that Mom meant well, that it would blow over if she'd just ignore it. The ocean crashed against rocks below them, relentless and indifferent. I worked constantly, Chris said. There was always another meeting, another deal, another crisis that needed my attention. Zoe would make plans and I'd cancel. She'd cook dinner and I'd eat at my desk. She'd try to talk to me about her day and I'd be checking my email while she spoke. I made her feel like background noise in her own marriage. You took her for granted, Kate said quietly. I erased her. The admission felt like glass in Chris's throat. She became invisible in her own home, and when she finally told me she couldn't do it anymore, that she was suffocating, I acted like she was the problem, like she was being dramatic. I told her she knew what she was getting into when she married a CEO. Kate flinched. Did you love her? She asked. Chris thought about lying, about saying no, about claiming it had been a mistake from the start. But standing here in borrowed paradise, he couldn't manage it. I don't know if I knew how to love anyone back then, he said. I don't know if I know how now. Kate flinched like he'd struck her. A small sound escaped her throat. That baby, she said after a long moment. You think it's yours? I don't know. Yes, you do. Kate's voice was firm now, gaining strength. You saw something in that child's face. You recognized something. And you've been spiraling ever since because you know. Deep down, you know. Chris closed his eyes. The image was burned into his retinas. Those dark curls, those features that echoed his family photos, the way the baby had fit so perfectly against Zoe's chest, like they were two halves of a whole. If that's your son, Kate continued, then Zoe was pregnant when you divorced, which means you missed everything, the pregnancy, the birth, every single milestone. You weren't just a bad husband, Chris. You were an absent father before you even knew you had a child to be absent from. I need to find out, Chris said. Then turn on your phone. What? Turn on your phone, Chris. Call someone, your assistant, a friend, someone who can tell you the truth. Because we're not moving forward with anything. Not this trip, not our relationship, not our life, until you know. Chris pulled his phone from his pocket. It felt heavier than it should, like it contained worlds he wasn't ready to face. He pressed the power button and watched it come to life. The messages flooded in, dozens of them, emails, texts, voicemails, each notification a tiny explosion of everything he'd been avoiding. But it was the message from Jennifer that made his hands shake. I'm sorry I sent that photo the way I did, but you deserve to know. Zoe's been consulting for us for months. The baby is beautiful. His name is Brad. He has your mother's eyes. Everyone can see it except you. Chris showed the message to Kate. She read it twice, her face going paler with each pass. Then she nodded slowly. Brad. His name is Brad. Kate walked back into the villa without another word. Chris followed, found her pulling clothes from her suitcase and stuffing them into her carry-on with violent, jerky movements. What are you doing? Packing, she said without looking up. There's a flight back tonight, I'm taking it. Kate, please. You have a son, Chris. She finally met his eyes, and hers were filled with tears that spilled over when she blinked. You have a son you didn't know about, with a woman you clearly never got over. And I'm standing here, watching you break apart over them while I'm supposed to be celebrating becoming your wife. What part of this says we should be getting married? I love you. No. Kate zipped her bag with violent force. You love the idea of me. You love that I'm appropriate, that your mother approves, that I fit into your life without demanding you change anything. But love, real love, the kind that shows up and fights and chooses someone every single day. You don't know how to do that. You just proved it. Chris watched her pack, unable to form an argument because she was right. About all of it. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know you are. Kate's voice softened slightly. But sorry doesn't fix this. You need to figure out who you are, Chris. What you want, what kind of man you're going to be. And you can't do that while pretending to be on a honeymoon with me. She called the front desk, arranged for a car to the airport, moved through the villa collecting her things with efficient devastation. Chris stood frozen, watching his future unravel. At the door she paused. For what it's worth, she said, I hope that little boy is yours. I hope you get the chance to know him. And I hope you're a better father than you were a husband. Because that woman at the airport? She looked happy, genuinely happy. Without you. Think about what that means. Then she was gone, and Chris was alone in paradise with the wreckage of his life spreading out before him like the ocean, vast and impossible to cross. He looked at his phone. Jennifer had sent the photo again, this time with better quality. He could see Brad's face clearly now. The resemblance was undeniable. This was his son, his child, a tiny person who existed because of him, but had grown and developed entirely without him. Chris sank onto the bed and stared at the image of his son for so long his eyes burned. The phone rang, his mother. Chris answered, his voice hollow. Christopher, Kate's mother just called me in hysterics saying Kate is on her way home from Bali alone. What on earth is happening? What did you do? I have a son, Mom. Silence. Then, what? Zoe had a baby. My baby. His name is Brad. And I didn't know. I didn't know because I was too busy listening to you tell me she wasn't good enough. Too busy proving myself to you instead of being a husband to her. Christopher, you can't possibly think... I'm done, Mom. The words came from somewhere deep and final. I'm done with your opinions, your judgments, your constant interference in my life. Zoe was right about you. Kate was right to leave. Everyone has been right except me. and I was too blind to see it because I was too busy trying to earn your approval. You're being irrational. You destroyed my marriage. You made Zoe feel worthless every chance you got, and I let you. I chose you over her, and now I have a son I've never met because of it." Chris hung up. Then he blocked her number, blocked her email, cut her out completely. He booked a flight home for the next morning, leaving paradise behind for the truth he should have faced long ago. Chapter 3. The Empire She Built. Chris's house felt like a mausoleum when he returned. Kate's things were already gone. Good. He deserved the emptiness. He spent the first day going through old files, searching for clues about Zoe's life. Then he found it, buried in his deleted emails. "We need to talk about our future." Sent the week before she'd filed for divorce. Chris's hands shook as he opened it. "Chris, I'm pregnant. I've tried to tell you in person for weeks, but you haven't been home before midnight once. I made your favorite dinner last Tuesday. You didn't come home. I waited at the restaurant for our anniversary. You forgot. I even came to your office, but your assistant said you were in back-to-back meetings and couldn't be disturbed. This baby deserves a father who shows up. I'm not sure that's you anymore. Please call me. This is the last time I'll ask." The timestamp showed 2 in the morning. He'd been at a board meeting, drinking scotch with investors, sealing a deal he couldn't even remember now. He'd deleted it without reading. Assumed it was another complaint. There had been no later. Chris called Jennifer. "I need to know everything about Zoe's consulting work." She sighed heavily. "She approached us 6 months after your divorce, had a proposal for restructuring our strategic planning division. Her presentation was flawless. She identified inefficiencies we'd been bleeding money on for years." "Was she pregnant when she started working with us?" "Yes, very obviously. Some board members thought it would be a problem. She proved them wrong. Delivered every project ahead of schedule even after the baby was born." Chris felt sick. "Who else knows? About Brad being mine?" "Anyone with eyes, Mr. Hanks. The resemblance is striking. We all assumed you knew and had some arrangement." Chris hung up and searched for Zoe online. The results were staggering. She'd built an empire. Gabby Strategic Solutions had contracts with major corporations, featured in business magazines, keynoted conferences, won awards. "The woman who built an empire from ashes," read one headline. The article detailed her rise with brutal honesty. "I learned that you can't wait for someone else to give you permission to be brilliant," Zoe had said. "You can't shrink yourself to fit someone else's vision." When that marriage ended, I decided to be exactly as big and loud and powerful as I wanted to be. The world was waiting for that version of me. There was a photo of her in her office, Brad on her lap, both grinning. Zoe looked radiant, free. Then he found something that made his blood run cold. A photo from a charity gala. Zoe in a stunning gown, laughing. And beside her, hand on her back, was Dante Rivers, his former best friend. Dante, who'd been his best man. Dante, who'd disappeared after the divorce without explanation. The caption read, "Zoe Gabby and business partner Dante Rivers." Chris felt the world tilt. Dante had chosen Zoe. Chris drove to Dante's office. The building was new, all glass and steel. The directory listed Gabby Strategic Solutions on the top floor. Dante stood in his office doorway, arms crossed. "You've got some nerve coming here. I need to talk to you." "About what?" "About how you destroyed the best woman either of us will ever know. About how you missed the birth of your son because you were too busy kissing your mother's ass." Chris flinched. "You were there when Brad was born." "Of course I was there. Someone had to be. Zoe called me, terrified and alone. She was bleeding badly. I got her to the hospital. I held her hand while the doctors worked. I paced that waiting room thinking she might die, thinking your son might die. And I called you 17 times. Your assistant said you were at a company retreat and couldn't be disturbed." Zoe almost died. She hemorrhaged during delivery, coded on the table. They brought her back, but it was close. Dante's voice cracked. And where were you? Playing golf with investors. Chris made it to Dante's bathroom just in time, vomiting until there was nothing left. When he emerged, Dante was staring out the window. I didn't know, Chris whispered. I didn't know any of it. That's the problem, Chris. You never knew. You never looked. So yeah, I was there. I've been there ever since. For Brad's first smile, his first word, his first steps, every milestone you missed. Chris sank into a chair. Are you together? You and Zoe? Dante laughed bitterly. That's what you're worried about? No. She's my best friend, my business partner. Brad is my godson. I love him like my own blood. But Zoe and I aren't together. She's too smart to trust her heart to a man again, not after what you did. I need to see him. Brad, I need to see my son. Dante opened his door. Get out. Dante, you gave up the right to make demands when you deleted her email, when you missed her calls, when you chose everything else over her. Brad has a good life, people who love him fiercely, and you're not in it. He's my son. Biology doesn't make you a father. Showing up makes you a father. And you've never shown up for anything that mattered. Chris left and drove to Zoe's house. It was beautiful. A craftsman home with a garden, toys scattered across the porch. A life he could see but couldn't touch. Through the window, he watched Zoe dancing with Brad in her arms, both laughing, Brad's head thrown back in joy. Dante arrived with groceries, let himself in with a key, joined the dance, lifting Brad onto his shoulders. Chris watched them, this family that didn't include him, and understood what he'd destroyed. Not just a marriage, a future, a son, everything that mattered, and he had no one to blame but himself. Chapter 4. The Reckoning. Chris spent the next week in a fog so thick he could barely function. He went to the office but accomplished nothing, sat in meetings without hearing a word. His assistant rescheduled appointments. His deputy handled urgent matters. Chris just sat in his office staring at the photo of Brad he'd saved to his phone, memorizing every detail. Dark curls, bright eyes that sparkled with mischief, a smile that could light up the world. His son, a person who shared his DNA but knew nothing about him. Kate texted once, I hope you find what you're looking for. You deserve to be happy, so do I. That's why I'm not coming back. I've already moved my things out completely. I wish you well, Chris. I really do. Chris didn't respond. What could he say? She'd left him for all the right reasons. His mother called repeatedly. He let every call go to voicemail, deleted each one without listening. Her voice had poisoned enough of his life. Then Jennifer knocked on his office door. Mr. Hanks, there's something you should know. Chris looked up from the photo of Brad he'd been studying. What? Zoe came by during the divorce to collect her personal items from when she used to work here before you were married. I thought you knew, but looking back now, I don't think you did. When? Jennifer consulted her tablet, scrolling through old calendar entries. About 8 months before Brad was born. She looked different. I remember thinking she seemed tired, maybe a little pale. Now I realize she was pregnant. Chris finished, his voice hollow. Yes, she asked if you were in. I said you were in meetings all day. She asked me to tell you she'd stop by, that she needed to talk to you, that it was important. She used that word specifically, important. Did you tell me? Jennifer's face crumpled with guilt. I sent you an email. You never responded. I assumed you'd seen it and chosen not to reach out. I thought maybe you two were working things out privately, and it wasn't my business. Chris opened his email, searched for Jennifer's name, filtered by that date, and there it was. Subject line, Zoe stopped by today. He'd archived it without reading, added it to a folder of things to deal with later that he'd never looked at again. She waited in the lobby for almost 2 hours, Jennifer continued, her voice thick with regret. Kept checking her phone, kept looking at the elevator like she hoped you'd come down. Finally, she left. She was crying, Mr. Hanks. I've never forgotten the look on her face. Chris put his head in his hands. I'm sorry, Mr. Hanks. I should have made sure you knew. I should have interrupted your meeting. I should have done something. No, Chris said. This isn't your fault. It's mine. All of it. Every single failure. Every missed moment. All mine. After Jennifer left, Chris did something he should have done long ago. He opened a blank document and started writing. Not a letter to Zoe, not an apology, a confession. He wrote about every failure, every moment he'd chosen wrong, every time he'd let his mother's voice drown out his own conscience. Every missed dinner, every forgotten anniversary, every dismissive comment when Zoe had tried to share her day. He wrote about the night she'd made his favorite meal and he'd come home after midnight. How the food had been cold, how she'd still served it to him with hopeful eyes that broke his heart now to remember. How he'd eaten it while reading emails on his phone, not even tasting it. He wrote about their anniversary, how she'd made a reservation at the restaurant where they'd had their first date, how she'd bought a new dress, done her hair special, how he'd been so consumed with the merger that he'd forgotten completely, how she'd called him from the restaurant, voice small and broken, and he'd snapped at her for interrupting an important meeting. He wrote about the morning she'd tried to tell him something important, morning sickness making her pale and shaky, and he'd rushed out for a breakfast meeting without asking if she was okay, without even noticing her distress. He wrote about his mother's constant criticism, how she'd called Zoe that girl instead of her name, how she'd questioned every choice Zoe made, every outfit she wore, every opinion she expressed, how Chris had sat silent at family dinners, nodding along when his mother made cutting remarks about Zoe's background, her education, her career choices. He wrote about the last night, how Zoe had looked at him with desperate hope, how she'd kissed him like she was drowning and he was air, how he'd kissed her back but been thinking about the board meeting the next morning, mentally rehearsing his presentation. He wrote about the divorce papers, how he'd signed them with relief, how he'd told himself he was better off, how he'd ignored the way Zoe's hands had shaken when she'd signed her name, how she'd had to stop and wipe her eyes before she could finish. He wrote for hours, pages and pages of failure and regret, every moment he wished he could take back, every word he wished he could unsay. When he finally stopped, his hands ached and his eyes burned from staring at the screen. He printed the document. Then he added one more page, a legal document signing over full parental rights to Zoe, child support backdated to Brad's birth, a trust fund that would ensure Brad's future regardless of Chris's presence or involvement. He wasn't trying to buy forgiveness. He was acknowledging that Zoe deserved every resource, every advantage, every bit of support he should have given her from the beginning. Chris put it all in an envelope and sent it to Zoe's office by messenger. Then he waited. The response came faster than he expected. Zoe herself appeared at his office that afternoon, her lawyer beside her. Both women looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Chris stood when they entered. Zoe looked at him with an expression he couldn't read, anger mixed with exhaustion, mixed with something that might have been pity. "Keep your money, Chris," she said without preamble. "Brad doesn't need your guilt payments." "It's not, but I'll accept your confession." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Since you're in a truth-telling mood, here's some truth for you." She dropped the folder on his desk with enough force that papers scattered. Inside were medical records. Chris opened it with shaking hands. High-risk pregnancy, placental complications, emergency admission at 7 months, severe hemorrhaging during delivery, emergency transfusions, code blue, time of death, 9:47, time of resuscitation, 9:51. Chris's vision blurred. "You died." For 4 minutes. Zoe's voice was steady, controlled, like she was discussing someone else's trauma. "I felt myself leaving, felt myself floating away from my body. And you know what brought me back? Not you. Not thoughts of our marriage or our love story. Brad. The sound of him crying. That tiny, perfect cry that told me he needed me. That I was his mother and I couldn't leave him alone in this world. She pulled out another document. Phone records. Dante called you 17 times that night, she continued. Your assistant told him not to disturb you, that you were at a company retreat, that personal matters would have to wait until you were back in the office. Chris felt bile rising again, but forced it down. You want to know what I remember about dying? Zoe asked, her voice finally cracking. Relief. For those 4 minutes, I felt relieved that I wouldn't have to raise a child alone, that I wouldn't have to explain to Brad why his father didn't want us, that I wouldn't have to be strong anymore. I was so tired of being strong, Chris, so tired of pretending your abandonment didn't destroy me. Tears streamed down Chris's face. But then they brought me back, Zoe said. And when I held Brad for the first time, covered in my blood, crying for me, I made a promise that he would never feel unwanted, that he would never question his worth, that he would grow up surrounded by people who chose to love him fiercely, that he would never experience the abandonment I felt. She gestured to her lawyer, who pulled out more photos. Brad's first birthday, his first Christmas, his first steps. Every photo showed Brad surrounded by people, Dante, friends, colleagues, a whole community of love. He has a good life, Chris, a beautiful life, full of people who show up, and you're not in it. I want to be, Chris whispered desperately. I want to know him. I want to be his father. Zoe's laugh was bitter. You can't want that. You have to earn that. And earning it means understanding exactly what you destroyed, what you missed, what you can never ever get back. She pulled out one final photo, Brad in the hospital, minutes old, wrinkled and perfect, and covered in vernix. Zoe holding him, her face exhausted and radiant and full of wonder. This moment, she said, her voice breaking. You'll never have it. His first smile, gone, his first word. Mama, in case you were wondering. He said it while looking right at me, and I cried for an hour. His first steps, he took them toward Dante, because Dante was there. You can't get those back, Chris. No amount of money or guilt or belated regret will give you those moments. They're gone. Forever. Chris sank into his chair, unable to stand under the weight of what he'd lost. I know, he whispered. Do you? Zoe's voice cracked wide open. Do you really? Because from where I'm standing, you're another powerful man who destroyed his family and now wants redemption, who wants to show up after the hard part is over and claim the rewards, who wants forgiveness without doing the work. But that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. Tell me how it works then, Chris begged. Tell me what to do. Zoe looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. When she spoke, her voice was quieter but no less devastating. You can't do anything, Chris. You gave up that right when you deleted my email, when you ignored my calls, when you chose your mother's approval and your career over our marriage, when you let me almost die alone. Brad deserves better than a father who shows up out of guilt and convenience. She turned to leave, her lawyer following. At the door, she paused without turning around. For what it's worth, she said, her voice barely audible, I waited for you at that hospital. Even after everything, even knowing our marriage was over, I waited for you to walk through that door, to ask if we were okay, to meet your son, to show up for once in your life. I waited for hours while Dante held Brad because I couldn't, while the doctors worked on me. I kept telling the nurses to wait, that you were coming, that you'd want to be there. I waited until they made me stop waiting because I needed surgery. Zoe, you never came. Then she was gone, and Chris was alone with the medical records that detailed her death and resurrection. The phone logs that showed his absence during the most critical moment of her life. The photos of everything he'd missed, everything he'd thrown away. He'd thought he'd hit bottom before. He'd been wrong. This was bottom, this moment, this devastating understanding of everything he'd lost and could never, ever reclaim. Chris put his head on his desk and sobbed until he had no tears left. Chapter 5. The Public Fall. The article appeared on a Monday morning. Chris saw it when he opened his email to find messages from every board member, subject lines ranging from "We need to talk" to "Emergency meeting required." He clicked the link. Business Weekly. Front page. The woman who built an empire from ashes. Zoe Gabby's rise from failed marriage to Fortune 100 powerhouse. The article was devastating. It detailed Zoe's journey from freelance consultant to CEO, her innovative methods, her client roster, her reputation for brilliance. And then it told the story of her marriage. They didn't name Chris directly, but the details were specific enough that anyone in their industry would know. Her ex-husband, a CEO at a major corporation, was so consumed with his own career that he missed her pregnancy entirely. When she nearly died during childbirth, he was at a company retreat and couldn't be bothered to take the 17 calls. She's raised her son alone while building a business empire. The article included quotes from clients and colleagues. From Dante, who praised her resilience without mentioning Chris, but making his absence devastatingly clear. "Some women wait for permission to be brilliant," Dante had said. Zoe didn't wait. She took her brilliance and built an empire with it. While pregnant, while recovering from a life-threatening delivery, while raising a child alone. There were photos. Zoe commanding her office. Zoe with Brad, both laughing. Zoe accepting awards, closing deals. And there, in the final paragraph, when asked if her ex-husband has met their son, Gabby's expression clouded. "He made his choices. Brad and I have made ours. We've built a beautiful life surrounded by people who chose to be in it. That's what family is. Not biology, but choice." Chris's phone started ringing. Board members, investors, colleagues. The CEO who'd abandoned his wife and child. By noon, the company's stock had dropped. By evening, investors had called emergency meetings. Chris sat in the boardroom facing angry shareholders. "Is this true?" the board chair demanded. "Did you miss the birth of your child for a company retreat?" Chris could have lied, could have spun it. Instead, he told the truth. "Yes, my ex-wife nearly died giving birth to our son. She coded on the table. A friend called me 17 times. My assistant dismissed them as personal matters. I was at a retreat closing a deal. I didn't know she was pregnant. I deleted her email without reading it. I didn't meet my son until weeks ago." Silence filled the room. How does a man not know his own wife is pregnant? "By not looking," Chris said. "By not listening. By being so consumed with work that he becomes blind to everything else. I failed as a husband and father. I won't fail this company by lying about it." The board chair leaned back. "You need to step down." "I was going to resign after this meeting." The deputy CEO, Rachel, spoke up. "If Chris resigns, I'd like to be considered for his position." The board chair looked at her. "You have young children, don't you?" "I do, which is why I understand work-life balance. I've been doing Chris's job while making it to school plays and family dinners. That makes me more qualified, not less." Chris looked at Rachel, really looked for the first time. She was brilliant. He'd just never bothered to notice. "I second that nomination," Chris said. "Rachel is the best choice. She's been carrying this company while I've been absent." The meeting ended with Rachel's promotion and Chris's resignation. Outside, reporters waited. Chris walked out to face them. Cameras flashed. Microphones appeared. "Mr. Hanks, is the article accurate?" Chris looked into the cameras. "Yes, every word. I failed my wife. I didn't know my son existed. I chose work over family repeatedly. Zoe Gabby is extraordinary. She built an empire while I was too blind to see her brilliance." She's raised our son alone while I congratulated myself on corporate success. I have no excuses. I was a terrible husband and an absent father. Will you seek custody? No. Brad has a good life, a mother who loves him fiercely. I have no right to disrupt that. I can only hope someday he'll give me the chance to know him, but that's his choice, not mine. What about Zoe? Chris's voice cracked. Zoe deserves every success she's built. She deserves happiness. She deserves someone who sees her, who shows up. I wasn't that man. Someone else will be, and I'll have to live with that. He walked away from the cameras, away from the company, away from the life he'd built on neglect. His phone buzzed. Dante. Saw your press conference. It doesn't fix anything, but it's a start. Chris drove home to the empty house. The video had gone viral. Comments ranged from supportive to vicious. He read them all. Then he saw one that made him stop. My dad did this to my mom, left us when I was a baby, never came back. At least this guy is honest about what he destroyed. Chris closed the laptop. Honesty was the bare minimum. Not redemption, just the truth, finally spoken. Chapter 6. The Rebuild. Chris sold everything his mother had chosen for him. The penthouse overlooking the city, the one she'd decorated with furniture that cost more than most people's cars. The luxury sedan she'd insisted a CEO needed. The artwork she'd selected to impress visitors. The watches she'd given him, each one marking some achievement she'd deemed worthy. He kept what he needed to live simply and donated the rest to a foundation for single mothers. Not his money, the actual items. Let other people build lives with the things his mother's values had demanded. Then he started showing up. Not to Zoe's office, not to her house, not demanding anything. He showed up at a shelter for homeless families and asked how he could help. They put him in the kitchen washing dishes, mountains of them, plates crusted with food, pots that needed scrubbing, silverware that needed sorting. Chris washed dishes for hours while the women who ran the shelter served meals to families who had nowhere else to go. He showed up at a community center that provided childcare for working mothers. They had him cleaning bathrooms, scrubbing toilets, mopping floors, restocking supplies, the glamorous life of a former CEO. He showed up at a support group for absent fathers trying to make amends. They made him listen. Just sit and listen to stories that sounded exactly like his own. Men who'd chosen work over family, men who'd missed births and birthdays and everything in between, men who were trying to claw their way back to children who didn't know them. Some of the stories ended with reconciliation, most didn't. He attended therapy 3 times a week, joined a parenting class even though he had no child to parent, no custody arrangement to prepare for. Read every book on child development he could find, took notes like he was studying for the most important test of his life, because he was. He wasn't trying to impress Zoe, wasn't building a case for why he deserved a second chance. He was trying to become someone different, someone better, someone who might someday be worthy of the possibility that Brad would choose to know him. One night at the support group, a man named David shared his story. I missed my daughter's birth because I was drunk, David said, his voice flat with the practice of telling this story many times. Missed her first 5 years because I was using. Got clean, got my life together, showed up at her 6th birthday party thinking I'd be welcomed back like a hero. Her mum slammed the door in my face, said I'd lost the right to call myself her father, said being sober didn't erase 5 years of absence. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the old heater. It took me 3 more years, David continued. 3 years of showing up at AA meetings every single day. 3 years of paying child support without being asked. 3 years of sending birthday cards I knew she'd never open, Christmas presents that were probably thrown away. Then her mum called, said my daughter had asked about me, asked if I was real or just a story she'd been told. They agreed to let me send letters, not see her, not talk to her, just write to her. Did you? Someone asked. Every single week for 2 years. Never got a response. I wrote about my day, my recovery, the things I was learning about being a better person. Just wrote into the void. Then, on her 9th birthday, I got a letter back. One sentence. Why did you leave? Shortest letter I've ever received, but it destroyed me. I wrote back the truth, that I was sick, that I was selfish, that leaving was the worst thing I'd ever done, but I couldn't stay while I was still using. She wrote back, "Are you better now?" I said I was trying every day to be better. She wrote, "Okay, maybe we can meet someday." David's voice cracked for the first time. She's 12 now. We meet once a month, supervised visits at a family center. I don't get to be her dad. Her stepdad is her dad. He's the one who taught her to ride a bike, helped with homework, was there for everything. But I get to be David, the guy who messed up but is trying, and some days that feels like more than I deserve. The group thanked David for sharing. Chris sat in silence, understanding the long road ahead of him. After the meeting, he drove home and started writing. Not to Zoe, to Brad. Dear Brad, you don't know me. I'm your biological father, but I don't have the right to call myself your dad. That title has to be earned through presence and consistency and love that shows up every day. I'm writing to tell you about myself. Not who I want you to think I am, but who I actually am. I'm someone who made terrible mistakes. I hurt your mother badly. I missed your birth because I was too self-absorbed to answer the phone. I wasn't there when you needed me most. I can't change any of that. But I can tell you that I'm trying to be better. I'm learning what it means to show up, to listen, to put someone else first. I'm learning these things too late to be the father you deserved from the beginning. But I'm learning them anyway, in case you ever want to know where you came from. In case you ever wonder if I think about you. I do. Every single day. I see photos your mom has made public, you on your first birthday, you learning to walk, you laughing with the people who love you. You look happy, you look loved. That's more important than anything I could offer you. If you ever want to meet me, I'll be here. If you never want to meet me, I'll understand. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I didn't fight to stay. I'm sorry you had to grow up wondering if your father wanted you. I wanted you. I just didn't know how to be the man you needed. I'm still learning. Maybe someday I'll get it right. Love, Chris. He put the letter in an envelope but didn't send it. Brad was too young to read it, too young to understand the weight of these words, but Chris kept writing. One letter every week, filling notebooks with words his son might never see. It became a ritual, a way of holding himself accountable, a record of his journey from who he'd been to who he was becoming. He wrote about therapy sessions where he confronted his mother's toxic influence, where he unpacked years of choosing her approval over his own values. He wrote about support group meetings where he heard his own failures reflected in other men's stories, where he learned that he wasn't uniquely terrible, but that didn't excuse what he'd done. He wrote about the moments he wanted to give up, wanted to say this was too hard, wanted to go back to the easier life of avoiding consequences. He wrote about the reasons he didn't give up. A photo of Brad's smile, a memory of Zoe's laugh, the possibility that someday he might earn the chance to know his son. He wrote about seeing Zoe on the news, accepting another award, her company expanding into international markets. He wrote about watching from a distance as she gave a keynote speech about resilience and success, about building empires from ashes, about refusing to let failure define you. He wrote about the day he saw her at a restaurant with a man, tall, kind-faced, attentive in ways Chris had never been. The way the man had pulled out her chair, the way they'd laughed together over dinner, the way Chris had felt his heart break all over again and known he had no right to the feeling. He wrote about attending a parenting workshop where they taught communication skills for talking with children, about practicing on a doll and feeling ridiculous and doing it anyway, because someday Brad might give him a chance and he needed to be ready. 6 months passed, then 8, then more. Chris's life transformed into something simpler, quieter, more honest. He worked part-time as a consultant, using his business skills but not drowning in corporate ambition. He volunteered regularly at the shelter and the community center. He showed up for therapy. He showed up for support group. He showed up for himself in ways he never had before. His mother tried to reach out multiple times through mutual friends, through family members, through lawyers. He didn't respond. That bridge was burned and needed to stay that way for his own healing. Kate sent him a card months after the breakup. "I heard you resigned. I heard about the foundation. I'm proud of you for choosing differently. I hope you find peace, Chris. You deserve it, and so does that little boy." Chris didn't find peace, but he found purpose, and one afternoon his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. "Chris Hanks? Yes? This is Dante Rivers. We need to talk." Chris's heart stopped. "Is Brad okay? Is Zoe?" "They're fine, but Zoe asked me to call you. She has a proposition." Chapter 7. The opening. Dante's office looked exactly as Chris remembered, down to the placement of books on the shelves. But this time when Chris entered, Dante didn't look angry. He looked tired, worn down by something Chris couldn't identify. "Sit down," Dante said without preamble. Chris sat, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. "Brad has been asking about fathers," Dante began, getting straight to the point in that way he always had. "He sees other kids at the park with their dads. He's starting to notice he doesn't have one. Zoe has been honest with him. She says his father lives in another city and is very busy. But Brad is smart, 4 years old and already asking questions that don't have easy answers." Chris's throat tightened. "What kind of questions? Why doesn't my daddy want me? Did I do something wrong? Is he dead?" Dante's voice was rough, like the words hurt to say. Kid logic. If his dad isn't around, it must be his fault somehow. He's internalizing your absence as his own failure. "No," the word came out strangled. "It's not his fault, it's mine, all mine. Zoe knows that. I know that. But Brad is 4 years old. He can't understand adult failure. He can't comprehend how a father could miss his birth, could not know he existed. He just knows he's different from the other kids, that something is missing." Dante pulled out his phone and showed Chris a video. Brad, at a playground, standing alone watching a father push his daughter on the swings. Brad's face was full of longing so profound it made Chris's chest ache. The father noticed Brad watching, smiled, asked if he wanted a push. Brad had shaken his head and run back to Dante, buried his face in Dante's leg. "What did he say?" Chris asked, his voice barely audible. "He asked if I could be his daddy instead. Said he likes me better than his real daddy anyway because I actually show up." Chris felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "Zoe is exhausted," Dante continued, putting his phone away. "Not physically, emotionally. She's been strong for so long, telling Brad stories about how special he is, how loved he is, surrounding him with people who chose him. But it's getting harder, because he wants what she can't give him, a father who's present, a dad who shows up." "I want to be his father," Chris said desperately. "I want to show up." "Then prove it." Dante slid a folder across the desk. "Zoe is willing to allow supervised visits. 1 hour, twice a month to start, at a neutral location. A child psychologist will be present to make sure Brad feels safe, to monitor his emotional responses. You break these rules even once, you're done, forever. No second chances." Chris opened the folder with shaking hands. The rules were extensive and specific. No gifts that could be seen as buying affection. No promises about the future he might not keep. No trying to be the fun dad who swoops in with toys and excitement. Just presence, consistency, being there without expectation of immediate love or acceptance. I'll do it, Chris said without hesitation. Anything, everything, whatever Brad needs. This isn't about you, Dante warned, his voice hardening. This is about Brad. You're not doing him a favor by showing up. He's giving you a chance you don't deserve. Remember that every single second of every single visit. I will. One more thing. Dante leaned forward, his eyes intense. I'll be there. Every visit. Watching. If you hurt that kid, if you disappoint him, if you make him feel unwanted for even a second, if you check your phone even once while you're supposed to be present, I will end this. Zoe might be willing to give you a chance because she's a better person than I am. I'm not convinced you deserve it. Understood. The first visit is this Saturday, 2 in the afternoon. The address is in the folder. Don't be late. Don't be early. Be exactly on time. Bring nothing. Expect nothing. Chris left Dante's office shaking from head to toe. He had 4 days to prepare for the most important hour of his life. He spent those days reading every book on interacting with young children, practiced active listening on his therapist, on his support group, on the parents at the community center where he volunteered. He bought simple clothes, jeans and a plain shirt, nothing fancy, nothing intimidating, just a man meeting his son. Saturday arrived and Chris barely slept the night before. He got to the community center 45 minutes early and sat in his car, watching the clock tick forward with agonizing slowness. At 1:55, he went inside. The room was bright and cheerful, toys organized in bins, books on low shelves, a small table with crayons and paper already set out, everything designed to make children feel comfortable, safe. Zoe was already there, sitting with Brad on her lap. The child psychologist, Dr. Rivera, stood nearby with a clipboard and a gentle expression. Brad looked up when Chris entered, dark curls falling into his eyes, his mother's features mixed with Chris's own family resemblance. A living, breathing person who carried Chris's DNA but knew nothing about him. Chris forgot how to breathe, forgot how to think, forgot everything except the miracle of this child existing in the world. Brad, Zoe said softly, her hand protective on Brad's shoulder. This is Chris. He's your biological father. He's here to spend some time with you. Only if you want to. You can say no if you're not ready. Brad studied Chris with the unfiltered scrutiny only children possess, looking him over from head to toe like he was trying to solve a puzzle. You're my daddy. Yes. Chris's voice cracked, broke completely. I am. Why don't you live with us? The question was innocent. Devastating. Exactly what Dante had warned him about. Chris knelt down to Brad's level, remembering everything he'd learned about age-appropriate honesty, about not making excuses, about taking responsibility without burdening the child with adult complexity. Because I made mistakes, Chris said carefully, choosing each word like it might break everything. Big ones. Before you were born, I wasn't a good husband to your mom. I wasn't there when she needed me. I wasn't ready to be a daddy. Brad processed this with the matter-of-fact wisdom children sometimes possess. Are you ready now? I'm trying to be. That's why I'm here, to spend time with you and learn how to be the dad you deserve, if you'll let me. Okay. Brad accepted this with remarkable simplicity. Do you want to color? Chris nearly sobbed right there. I would love to color. They sat at the table. Brad handed Chris a crayon, green, because green was Brad's favorite color according to the file Dante had given him. I'm making a dinosaur. You can make one too, but yours can't be better than mine. I'll do my best to make a terrible dinosaur, Chris said, earning a small giggle from Brad. For the next hour, Chris colored dinosaurs. He listened to Brad explain the difference between a T-Rex and a Stegosaurus with the confidence of a 4-year-old who'd watched a lot of dinosaur shows. He admired Brad's artwork with genuine enthusiasm. He asked simple questions and received elaborate answers that wandered through topics with the chaotic logic of childhood. He didn't try to hug Brad, didn't try to rush affection or force connection, just sat beside his son and colored and tried not to cry every time Brad laughed. Zoe watched from across the room, sitting with Dr. Rivera, her expression carefully neutral, but Chris caught her wiping her eyes once when Brad showed him a drawing, and Chris had responded with the exact right amount of enthusiasm. When the hour ended, Dr. Rivera gently told Brad it was time to go. "Can Chris come back?" Brad asked, looking up at the psychologist with hopeful eyes. "Would you like that?" Dr. Rivera responded, always putting the choice in Brad's hands. Brad nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, he's a good colorer, and he didn't get mad when I told him my dinosaur was better." Chris's vision blurred with tears he refused to let fall. "Thank you, Brad. I would really like to come back, if that's okay with you." "Okay, bye, Chris." "Bye, buddy." Zoe gathered Brad's things. As she walked past Chris, she paused for just a moment. "You did well," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "Keep doing exactly that." Then they were gone, and Chris was alone with Dr. Rivera. "How do you think it went?" the psychologist asked, making notes on her clipboard. "I don't know. I felt like I was going to collapse the whole time, like one wrong word would shatter everything." "That's normal for first meetings. The important thing is that Brad felt safe. He engaged with you naturally. He asked you to come back. That's a very good first step, Mr. Hanks." Chris went to his car and cried for 20 minutes straight. Relief, grief, gratitude, terror. All of it mixed together until he couldn't distinguish one emotion from another. He'd met his son. His son had asked him to come back. His son had called him a good colorer. It was more than he deserved, more than he'd dared to hope for. The second visit was 2 weeks later. Brad remembered him, ran up with a book about space. "Chris, read this to me." Chris read the book 4 times because Brad kept asking for one more time, and Chris would have read it 100 times if Brad wanted. The third visit, Brad brought a puzzle. They did it together, Brad's small hands working to fit pieces next to Chris's larger ones, both of them celebrating each successful connection. The fourth visit, Brad fell asleep during story time, his head resting against Chris's shoulder like it belonged there. Chris didn't move, didn't breathe, just sat there holding his son for the first time, feeling the weight of him, the warmth, the impossible trust. Zoe's expression softened when she saw them. Just slightly, just enough that Chris noticed. "He's comfortable with you," she said when Brad woke up, rubbed his eyes, smiled at Chris without fear. "I'm grateful for that, more grateful than I can express. Don't make me regret this, Chris. I won't. I swear on everything I am, I won't." After the 5th visit, Zoe pulled Chris aside, while Brad showed Dr. Rivera a new drawing. "Brad's been talking about you at home," she said, her voice guarded but not hostile, "asking when he gets to see Chris again, telling Dante about the things you do together. He's starting to love you." "Is that okay?" Chris asked carefully. "I don't know yet." Zoe's honesty was almost painful. "He's starting to love you, and that terrifies me, because if you disappoint him now, if you leave, if you prove unreliable, he won't survive it. He's already asked me once if you're going to leave like some daddies leave their kids. Do you know how hard it was to answer that question when I don't know the answer myself?" "I'm not leaving," Chris said firmly, looking directly into her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere, ever. You say that now, but what happens when this gets hard? When the novelty wears off? When showing up becomes inconvenient? When you have work conflicts or other obligations? Then I'll choose Brad, every single time. That's what fathers do. They show up. They choose their children. I didn't understand that before. I do now." Zoe searched his face, looking for the lie, looking for the crack that would prove he was still the man who'd failed her. "We'll see," she finally said. "Time will tell who you really are." As Chris left that day, he saw Brad through the window, waving goodbye with both hands, his whole face lit with joy. Chris waved back, his heart so full of love, it physically hurt. He was Brad's father, not because of biology, not because of rights or claims, because Brad was choosing to let him be. And Chris would spend the rest of his life being worthy of that choice. Chapter 8. The Bond. The visits continued through spring into summer. Twice a month became weekly at Zoe's suggestion after Dr. Rivera reported that Brad was thriving, that the consistency was good for him, that Chris had proven reliable. 1 hour became 2, when Brad asked if Chris could stay longer, and Zoe had agreed. Brad started bringing things to show Chris, a parade of treasures that mattered in the mysterious logic of 4-year-olds. Drawings from school that Chris taped to his refrigerator with reverent care. A tooth he'd lost, which Chris admired like it was made of diamonds. A rock he'd found that he swore looked like a dragon, and Chris agreed it absolutely did. Chris treated each treasure like gold because to Brad they were, because sharing them meant trust, meant Brad was letting Chris into his world. He learned Brad's favorite color was green, but that purple was a close second. That he hated broccoli but loved carrots, especially with ranch dressing. That he had nightmares sometimes about monsters under the bed and needed his nightlight on to sleep, the one shaped like a turtle that projected stars on the ceiling. He learned that Brad loved being read to but struggled with loud noises, would cover his ears at fire sirens or thunder, that he was tender-hearted and cried when he saw hurt animals on nature shows, would ask if the animals were okay even after the show was over, that he laughed with his whole body when something was really funny, the same way Zoe did, throwing his head back with pure joy. Chris memorized every detail like he was studying sacred texts. One visit, Brad was quieter than usual. Sat at the table coloring, but without his usual enthusiasm, his movements slow and sad. "What's wrong, buddy?" Chris asked gently. "A kid at school said I don't have a real dad." Brad's voice was small, hurt in a way that made Chris want to break things. "He said Dante is just pretending, that he's not my real dad because he's not married to Mama." Chris felt rage flood through him, protective and fierce, but he kept his voice gentle. This moment mattered. How he handled this would stay with Brad. "What did you say back to him?" "I said I have lots of people who love me, Mama and Dante and you, but the kid said that's not the same as a real family, that real families all live together in the same house." Chris pulled Brad close, careful and gentle. "Listen to me, okay? That kid doesn't know what he's talking about. Family isn't just about who lives in the same house. It's about who shows up for you, who loves you, who makes you feel safe. You have all of that, with your mama, with Dante, with everyone who's been there since you were born, and now with me, if you'll let me be part of your family. So Dante can be my family even if he's not my daddy. Dante is absolutely your family. He's been more of a father to you than I have. He was there when you were born. He taught you to walk. He's been showing up for you your whole life. I'm just trying to catch up." Brad thought about this, his face serious. "Can I have 2 dads? You and Dante?" Chris's heart shattered and healed simultaneously. "If that's what feels right to you, then yes. You can have as many people loving you as you want. You can call Dante your dad because he's earned that title, and maybe someday you'll feel comfortable calling me dad too. But that's up to you. You get to decide what feels right." Brad hugged him tight, small arms wrapping around Chris's neck. "Okay, you're both my dads then. Dante is my everyday dad. You're my Saturday dad." Chris held his son and tried not to cry, tried not to let Brad feel the shaking in his shoulders. After the visit, Zoe pulled him aside again while Brad gathered his things. He told me about the conversation, about the kid at school. "Kids can be cruel. You handled it well. You didn't try to erase Dante. You didn't make it about yourself. You put Brad first. Dante earned his place in Brad's life. I didn't. I'm just grateful to be here at all." Zoe's eyes glistened with tears she didn't let fall. He drew you a picture. At school, the teacher asked the kids to draw their families. Brad drew me, Dante, and you, all holding hands. She showed him the drawing on her phone, stick figures in bright crayon, Brad in the middle, beaming, Zoe on one side, Dante and Chris on the other. All connected. "Can I have a copy of that?" Chris asked, his voice rough. "It's already in your email. I sent it before I could talk myself out of it." Chris didn't know what to say to that, to the gesture of inclusion it represented. "Thank you," he finally managed. More visits, more moments that built on each other like bricks in a foundation. Brad teaching Chris how to build with blocks, his small hands guiding Chris's larger ones. Chris teaching Brad how to whistle, both of them failing spectacularly and laughing about it. Brad falling at the playground and skinning his knee. Chris cleaning it gently with the first aid kit he now kept in his car, putting on a bandage while Brad tried so hard not to cry. "Daddies make boo-boos better," Brad had said, and Chris's heart had shattered and healed yet again. Brad's first soccer game. Chris sat in the stands beside Zoe and Dante, cheering when Brad kicked the ball enthusiastically in the wrong direction and when he scored on his own goal by accident. Brad looked up at them afterward, grass-stained and beaming. "Did you see me?" "We saw everything," Chris said, scooping Brad up. "You were amazing." Slowly, carefully, Chris was building a relationship with his son, real and substantial and earned through consistency. But he was also watching Zoe. She looked tired, not physically. She was as beautiful and powerful as ever, commanding rooms and closing deals and running her empire. But there was something in her eyes, a weariness that ran deeper than lack of sleep, a weight she carried that Chris was only beginning to understand. One evening, after dropping Brad off, Chris asked Dante about it. "Is Zoe okay?" Dante sighed, long and heavy. "She's exhausted, Chris. She's been holding everything together alone for years, building her business, raising Brad, being strong all the time. It's catching up with her." "What can I do?" "Keep showing up, that's all you can do. Don't ask for more than she's ready to give. Don't push for reconciliation or forgiveness or anything beyond what she offers. Just be consistent. Be present for Brad. That takes pressure off her." Chris nodded. "I will." But he wanted more. He wanted to tell Zoe that he saw her now, that he understood what he'd missed, that she was the most extraordinary person he'd ever known. He wanted to tell her he'd been wrong about everything, that she'd never needed to be smaller or quieter or more acceptable, that she'd always been brilliant and he'd been too blind to see it. He wanted to tell her that watching her with Brad, the patience, the love, the fierce protection, made him understand what real strength looked like, what real success meant, what actually mattered in life. But he couldn't say any of it, because this wasn't about him. It was about Brad, about being a father, about earning trust one moment at a time. So Chris kept showing up, kept being present, kept learning what it meant to love someone more than himself. And slowly, impossibly, Brad started calling him Daddy. Not Chris Dad, not Saturday Dad, just Daddy. The first time it happened, Chris had to excuse himself to cry in the bathroom. When he came back, Brad was worried. "Are you sad, Daddy?" "No, buddy. I'm happy. The happiest I've ever been. Because of me. Because of you." Brad hugged him tight. "I love you, Daddy." Chris held his son and knew he'd spend the rest of his life trying to deserve those words. 3 simple words that meant everything. That changed everything. "I love you too, Brad. So much." Chapter 9. The truth. Chris's phone rang late one night, jarring him from sleep. Dante's name on the screen. "Zoe's in the hospital." Chris's world tilted violently. "What happened?" "She collapsed at work. Exhaustion, stress. The doctor says she's been running on fumes for too long. Her body finally gave out." "Is she's stable?" But she needs rest, real rest, not just a few days, weeks at minimum. The doctor was very clear. She pushes herself any harder and next time could be worse. Chris was already getting dressed, phone wedged between his shoulder and ear. Where is she? Chris, she doesn't want to see you. I don't care. Tell me where she is. Dante gave him the hospital name and room number. I'm calling because Brad needs consistency right now. He's scared. He keeps asking if Mama is going to die like she almost did when he was born. He needs both of us to be steady for him. Where is he now? My house. He's asleep, but it took hours. He wouldn't settle until I promised Mama would be okay. But he's going to need more than promises tomorrow. He's going to need both of us showing up. I'll be there. Whatever he needs. Whatever time works. Can you take him tomorrow? Full day. I need to be at the hospital with Zoe, and I need to manage some of her work emergencies so they don't pile up while she's trying to recover. Chris's stomach dropped. A full day, alone, no supervision, no Dr. Rivera, just him and Brad. Yes, he said without hesitation. Of course, whatever Brad needs. I'll bring him to your place in the morning. 8, okay? Perfect. Chris drove to the hospital anyway, knowing Dante said Zoe didn't want visitors, but needing to see for himself that she was alive. He stood outside her room, looking through the small window in the door. She was asleep, monitors beeping steadily beside her. She looked small in the hospital bed, vulnerable in a way he'd never seen her. Zoe was always so strong, so powerful, so in control. Seeing her like this broke something in Chris. Dante found him there an hour later. She's going to be okay, Dante said quietly, but she can't keep doing this, trying to be everything for everyone, running herself into the ground. What can I do? Be there for Brad. That's the biggest help right now. Let her recover knowing he's taken care of. I will, I promise. The next morning, Dante arrived with Brad at exactly 8. Brad looked small and scared, clutching a stuffed dinosaur Chris had never seen before. Hey, buddy, Chris said gently, kneeling to Brad's level. How are you doing? Is Mama okay? Brad's voice was tiny, terrified. She's resting at the hospital. The doctors are taking very good care of her. She just needs to sleep and get strong again. Like when I was a baby? Chris's chest tightened. Kind of like that. But this time she's going to be fine. She just worked too hard and got tired, okay? Brad nodded, but didn't look convinced. Dante handed Chris a bag. His favorite snacks, instructions for nap time. He still takes one around 1 o'clock. Emergency contacts. My cell is on there, but I'll be at the hospital, so I might not answer right away. We'll be fine, Chris said, with more confidence than he felt. Brad, Dante knelt down. You're going to have a fun day with Chris, okay? And tonight, you'll come back to my house, and tomorrow, we'll go see Mama. Brad hugged Dante tight. Promise? Promise? Then Dante was gone, and Chris was alone with his son for the first time. Really alone, responsible for every need, every fear, every moment. He was terrified. But Brad looked up at him with those big eyes and said, Can we make pancakes? And Chris realized he could do this. He had to do this. They made pancakes together. Brad helped pour the batter, making shapes that looked nothing like circles, but that Brad declared were perfect. They ate together at Chris's small kitchen table, Brad's legs swinging because his feet didn't reach the floor. Daddy? Yeah, buddy? Are you scared? Chris thought about lying, about being strong, but Zoe had always told Brad the truth in age-appropriate ways, and Chris needed to honor that. A little bit, Chris admitted. I want to make sure you have a good day, that you're not too worried about Mama. Me too, Brad said. I'm scared about Mama. That's okay. It's okay to be scared. But we can be scared together and still have a good day. Want to know a secret? Brad nodded. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do things even when you are scared. And you're being very brave right now. They spent the day together, park lunch that Brad helped make. Sandwiches cut into dinosaur shapes with cookie cutters Chris had bought specifically for today. Ice cream because sometimes scared kids need ice cream. Reading books on the couch, building a fort out of couch cushions that took over the entire living room. Normal things, dad things. When Brad got cranky in the afternoon, tired and overwhelmed, Chris navigated the tantrum with skills from his parenting classes, stayed calm, validated feelings, offered choices, held Brad when he cried and didn't try to fix it, just let Brad feel what he needed to feel. "I want Mama," Brad sobbed. "I know, buddy, I know she'll be better soon, but it's okay to miss her." "What if she doesn't get better?" "She will. The doctors promised. And Mama is the strongest person I know. She's going to rest and get better." At nap time, Brad asked Chris to stay. "Will you read me a story? Mama always reads 3 before naps." Chris read 5 stories. Brad fell asleep halfway through the last one, his hand still holding onto Chris's shirt. Chris sat in the chair beside Brad's makeshift bed, the couch with blankets and pillows, watching his son sleep, and understood with devastating clarity what he'd missed. These moments, the mundane magic of naptime routines and tantrum navigation, and reading the same book over and over because it's a favorite. The beauty of a child trusting you with their fears, falling asleep holding on to you because you make them feel safe. He'd traded this for board meetings and deal closings and his mother's approval. He'd been so profoundly stupid. When Brad woke up, they called Dante to check on Zoe. Dante put Zoe on speakerphone. "Hi, baby." Zoe's voice was tired but warm. "Mama!" Brad's whole face lit up. "Are you okay?" "I'm getting better, sweetheart. I miss you so much. Are you having fun with Daddy?" "Yeah. We made pancakes and went to the park and built a fort and Daddy read me 5 stories. Chris could hear the smile in Zoe's voice. 5 stories. That's more than I usually read." "I know. Daddy's really good at reading." After they hung up, Brad looked at Chris. "Mama sounded happy." "She did, because you're having a good day. That makes her happy." When Dante came to pick up Brad that evening, Brad didn't want to leave. "Can I stay with Daddy?" he asked. Chris's heart soared and broke simultaneously. "Not tonight, buddy," Dante said gently. "But you'll see Daddy again soon." Brad hugged Chris tight. "Bye, Daddy. Today was fun even though I was scared about Mama." "Bye, Brad. You were so brave today." After they left, Chris stood in his apartment surrounded by the fort they'd built, the toys they'd played with, the evidence of a full day of fatherhood. His phone buzzed. A text from Zoe. "Dante said you took good care of him. Thank you, Chris. You don't have to thank me. He's my son." Zoe. "I know, that's why I'm thanking you, for finally understanding what that means." A pause, then another message. "He loves you, really loves you. Please don't break his heart. He won't survive it." Chris. "I won't. I swear on my life I won't. He's everything to me." Zoe. "I'm starting to believe that." Chris stared at those words for a long time, starting to believe. Not there yet, but starting. It was more than he deserved, and exactly what he needed to keep fighting for. Chapter 10. The Reunion. 3 months passed, like water through fingers. Impossible to hold, but leaving everything changed. Brad spent weekends with Chris, full days where they built routines that felt sacred. Saturday morning pancakes with shapes that got progressively sillier. Sunday afternoon walks where Brad collected rocks and leaves and declared each one special. Bedtime stories that stretched longer each night because neither of them wanted the day to end. Zoe recovered slowly, learning to delegate at work, to accept that she didn't have to carry everything alone. Dante took on more leadership in the company, proving himself worthy of the trust Zoe had placed in him years ago. She worked fewer hours, spent more evenings with Brad, started sleeping through the night without nightmares about hospital monitors and code blues. And Chris kept showing up, every scheduled visit, Every soccer game where Brad still kicked the ball in creative wrong directions. Every school event where Brad wanted him there. He didn't miss a single one. Not for work, not for anything, not ever. One Saturday afternoon, Chris arrived to pick up Brad and found Zoe standing on the porch alone, no Brad bouncing with excitement beside her. "Where's Brad?" Chris asked, his stomach dropping with immediate worry. "He's at Dante's for the afternoon. I asked Dante to take him. I wanted to talk to you." Zoe gestured to the porch chairs. "Sit, please." Chris sat, his heart hammering. This felt significant, final, like everything could change in the next few minutes. Zoe was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the street where children played, their laughter carrying on the afternoon breeze. "Brad asked me a question last night," she finally said. "He asked why you don't live with us like other daddies live with their families." Chris's breath caught. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth, that we're not married anymore, that sometimes adults make mistakes they can't undo, that some things break too completely to be fixed. He asked if we could try again, if you could come live with us, and we could be a family like his friend Tyler's family." "Zoe, let me finish." Her voice was steady but strained, like she was holding something fragile that might shatter if she moved wrong. "I've been thinking about this for weeks, watching you with Brad, watching you show up consistently, reliably without excuses, watching you become the father he deserves. And I've been terrified." Chris waited, afraid to breathe. "Because I can't let myself want this," Zoe continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I can't let myself believe that you've actually changed. It would destroy me if you reverted back to who you were, if you chose work over us again, if you made me invisible again. I built myself back from that destruction once. I won't survive it a second time." "You won't have to," Chris said firmly. "I won't go back to being that person. I can't. He doesn't exist anymore. You can't promise that. People don't fundamentally change, Chris. They just manage their weaknesses better on good days. What happens on the bad days? What happens when work gets demanding? When your ego wants recognition? When being present gets difficult?" Chris leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "You're right. I can't promise I'll never mess up again. I can't promise I'll be perfect. But I can promise I'll never stop trying. I can promise that Brad will always come first, that you will always come first, that I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of the chance you're giving me. And on the days I fall short, I'll own it, apologize, and do better the next day." Zoe's eyes filled with tears that caught the afternoon light. "You hurt me so badly, Chris, made me feel worthless, made me question everything about myself. I built myself back from nothing, made myself into someone who doesn't need validation from anyone. I can't go backward, I won't. I'm not asking you to go backward. I'm asking you to consider going forward, not to who we were, that marriage deserved to die, to who we could be, two completely different people who learned devastating lessons and grew from them." "I don't love the man you were," Zoe said quietly. "I don't love the man I was either. I barely recognize him now. But I might love the man you're becoming." The words came out barely above a whisper, like admitting them cost her something vital. "And that terrifies me more than anything, because loving you again means trusting you with my heart, means trusting you with Brad's heart. And if you break it, if you break him, we won't survive it. I won't break his heart, or yours. I'd rather die than hurt him the way I hurt you." That's easy to say now. What about in 6 months, a year, when the novelty wears off and being a family is just hard work? Then I'll do the hard work, because that's what love is, Zoe. Not the easy moments, the hard ones. The ones where you choose to stay when leaving would be simpler. I didn't understand that before. I do now. Zoe stood, walked to the porch railing, gripped it with both hands. Chris stood too but didn't approach. gave her space to think. "I'm not saying I'm ready for you to move in," she finally said, turning to face him. "I'm not saying I'm ready for marriage or big declarations or promises about forever, but I'm willing to try, really try. Not just family dinners and supervised visits, a real relationship, dating, figuring out if we can build something new from what we destroyed." Chris felt tears burning his eyes. "Are you sure? I don't want you to do this for Brad if it's not what you want." "I'm not sure of anything, except that I'm tired of being scared, tired of protecting myself from someone who's proven he's trying to change. You can't give me back the years we lost. You can't undo the pain, but you can be here now, and that's enough to start with." Chris moved closer, slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wanted. She didn't. "I love you," he whispered. "I never stopped. I just didn't know how to show it. Didn't know what it meant to really love someone. I loved you too. Past tense. Then I hated you. Now I'm somewhere in between, trying to figure out what this new version of us looks like. We'll figure it out together." "No." Zoe's voice was firm. "We'll figure it out separately first, then together. I need to know you can maintain this version of yourself without me watching, without the pressure of proving yourself. I need to see that you're doing this for you and Brad, not for me." "Okay, whatever you need. I need time. I need slow. I need you to earn every single inch of this, Chris. Every conversation, every date, every moment of trust. Nothing is guaranteed. Nothing is owed. You have to choose this every day, and so do I." "I understand." Zoe looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted, softened. "Brad wants to spend next weekend with both of us. Together. He's been asking for weeks. I kept saying no because I wasn't ready. But maybe it's time." Chris's heart soared. "Really? One weekend? We take him to the zoo or the park or wherever he wants. We act like a family. We see how it feels. And if it feels wrong, we stop. Brad's happiness comes first. Not yours, not mine. His. Agreed. And Chris?" Zoe stepped closer, looked up at him with eyes that still held caution, but also something that looked like hope. "Don't make me regret this. Don't make him regret this. Because if you hurt that little boy, if you disappoint him after he's opened his heart to you, I will make sure you never see him again. I don't care what courts say. I will protect my son from anyone who hurts him, including you. I know, and I wouldn't expect anything less. He deserves that protection." They stood there on the porch, two people who destroyed each other trying to figure out if they could build something better from the ruins. "I should go get Brad," Zoe said finally. "He'll want to know you're still coming tomorrow for your regular visit." "I'll be there, always." The weekend together came faster than Chris expected. He picked them up early Saturday morning, Brad bouncing with excitement at having both parents together. "Are we a family now?" Brad asked from his car seat. "We're figuring out what kind of family we want to be," Zoe answered carefully. "What do you think? Where should our family go today?" "The zoo. I want to see the elephants." The zoo was crowded with families, the air filled with children's laughter and animal sounds. Brad ran ahead to each exhibit, calling back for both of them to look, to see, to share each moment. Chris watched Zoe watching Brad and saw everything he'd been too blind to see before. The fierce love in her eyes, the patience as Brad asked the same questions repeatedly, the joy she took in his joy. She was radiant, powerful, entirely herself. "You're staring," Zoe said without looking at him. "I know. I'm trying to memorize this. In case it doesn't happen again." "It'll happen again." Zoe finally looked at him. "I'm scared, but I'm not going to let fear make decisions for me anymore. We'll take this slow, but we'll take it." At the elephant exhibit, Brad tugged on both their hands. "Can we take a family picture?" Zoe hesitated, then nodded. They posed together, Brad between them, all three smiling. A stranger offered to take the photo so they could all be in it. Later, when they stopped for lunch, Brad fell asleep in his stroller, exhausted from excitement. "He's happy," Chris observed. "He is. And I'm trying to trust that this happiness will last, that you'll keep showing up, that this isn't temporary." "It's not. Zoe, I need you to know something. I don't just want to be Brad's father. I want to be your partner, your equal, someone who supports your dreams the way I should have from the beginning, someone who sees how extraordinary you are and tells you every day." "Words are easy, Chris. I know, so watch my actions. Judge me by what I do, not what I say. I'll prove it. Every single day." Zoe looked at him, really looked, and he saw the moment something shifted, not trust yet, but possibility. "Okay," she said, "let's see what you've got." The next months unfolded like a story being written one careful word at a time. Family dinners, where Chris cooked and Zoe worked and Brad played between them. Date nights where they talked for hours, learning each other again, discovering who they'd become in the years apart. Chris defended Zoe when a colleague made a dismissive comment about work-life balance at a networking event, walked out of the conversation and never looked back. He chose Brad's school play over an investor meeting, showed up to Zoe's keynote speech and sat in the front row, cheering louder than anyone. He chose them, every single time, without hesitation. And slowly, impossibly, Zoe started to trust him. 6 months after that conversation on the porch, Zoe asked Chris to stay after Brad went to bed. They sat on the couch, close but still careful. "Brad asked me again when you're moving in," Zoe said. "I told him I don't know. He said it doesn't seem that complicated, that you love us and we love you." "Kid logic," Chris said with a small smile. "Maybe it's not wrong, though." Zoe turned to face him fully. "I see you, Chris. I see how you've changed, how consistent you've been, how you show up for Brad without being asked, how you support my work without resentment. You've become someone I barely recognize, in the best possible way. I'm still learning, still trying. I know, and that's what makes this real. You're not perfect, but you're present. You're honest about your failures. You apologize when you mess up. That's all I ever needed." "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I'm ready to try, really try, not just dating, building a life together, slowly, carefully, with Brad's happiness as our compass." Chris pulled her close, and this time she melted into him, rested her head against his chest like she used to before everything broke. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "This version of you, the empire builder, the fierce mother, the woman who refused to stay broken." "I loved you too," Zoe said, past tense, "then hated you. Now I'm loving you again. This new version, the man who shows up, who chooses his family, who became the father our son deserves." "Our son," Chris repeated, loving the sound of it. "That sounds right." It does. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd destroyed each other learning how to build something better, stronger, real. Brad found them the next morning, curled together on the couch where they'd fallen asleep talking. "Daddy stayed." Brad's delighted shout woke them both. "Good morning, buddy," Chris said, pulling Brad up between them. "Are we a real family now?" Chris looked at Zoe. She looked at him. Both of them smiled. "Yeah," Zoe said. "We're figuring out how to be a real family." "Finally!" Brad threw his arms around both of them. "I've been waiting forever." Chris held his son and the woman he'd lost and found again, and understood that this messy, complicated, hard-won love was worth more than every success he'd ever chased. "I love you both," he said, "more than anything." "We love you too," Brad said simply. Zoe didn't say it out loud, but she squeezed Chris's hand, and he felt it in the way she held on. They were broken people building something beautiful from the pieces. It wasn't perfect, it would never be easy, but it was real, and it was theirs, and that was everything.